been there for 4 hours and nobody's seen me. Shrub hiding is level 1. I got that down pat. But tree climbing, hiding, my master said is really tough. And it's a work in progress. But I'm getting there. I am. Can you tell me about that, please? She was petrified.
I saw him standing behind the tree for like 20 minutes, so I decided to finally ask him what he wanted.
Well, people are too easy to prank, so I'm gonna test out these goats right now. Well, I'm not sure how you measure pranking a goat, but I consider that mission accomplished.
Well, it's so good to have you with us today. We're in the second part of this series, Camouflage, and let's step into part 2 with this question. What is one impulse purchase? You know, I gotta have it now, I want it now, I gotta get it now. What's one impulse purchase that, later you regret it? It doesn't matter the time period on regret. It could be a year later, a month later, a day later. It could be right after you clicked on that purchase online or right when your spouse walked through the door. So think about it. What is one of those impulse purchases? Well, when I was thinking about this question, my mind went back to, this one day. You see, my wife and I went through a pretty lengthy infertility journey, and then she got pregnant. Then our infertility doctor shared with us that I don't think this was a medical term, but that the dam was broken. He said, hey, there's a great chance, the odds are in your favor to have twins next. And we did not want twins. So we decided for me to have a procedure. So I had that done, and literally the next day, I found myself, purchasing this. An RX-8 sports car, Shinka edition, leather seats, red trim, 6-speed. This thing could move. And at some point later, again, I'm not sure the exact timeline, regret set in. I mean, this wasn't a family car at all. It was fun, but not a family car. It was one of those impulse decisions. And we've all been in those moments where we had to have something, now. But how does now usually work out? I mean, I know for me now, usually those decisions that must have now, must do now, must respond now, must make a decision now, usually doesn't work out too well. But like I mentioned, we're in this series, Camouflaged, and in part 1, we focus on these 2 questions. The 2 questions was, who am I? This is a being question. Who am I really? And the second question, which is an existence question, purpose question, is what am I doing here? And throughout this series, we're following along on the storyline of one specific purpose. And in part 1, we looked at 2 very specific events that were separated by 97 years. The first one was the birth of Jacob. And in the birth narrative, there was this image of Esau, his twin brother, coming out first, and Jacob was holding on to his heel, which is the image of Jacob wanting to be first. Because, being first came with a lot of privileges. And so they named him Jacob, which means deceiver or supplanter. I mean, that was literally his name. And then 97 years later, Jacob finds himself all alone, and he spends an entire night wrestling with God. And, in the morning, when the sun was rising, God changed his name from Jacob to, Israel. Strives with God. I mean, this was all about the existence question, the purpose question, God all of a sudden says to Jacob, hey, Jacob, the promise is going to come out of your lineage for the descendants to be as numerous as the stars. And well, Jacob's 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. And I've thought a lot this week about that night that Jacob spent wrestling with God. This week I took a moment, I started writing something, and I decided to post it on social media. And I started out the post with two questions. Are you wrestling with God? Do you need to wrestle with God? And then this is what I wrote. I have found myself in this season of life going toe to toe with God, hanging on, holding tightly, engaged in a UFC, embedded in the octagon type of wrestling with God. And what I find so amazing is that God is staying locked in with me. There is an uncomfortable comfort that God is pouring into me that leaves me filled with courage and peace, knowing that He is guiding me. And maybe, just maybe, you need to step into the octagon with God, knowing that He will meet you there. I can't encourage you enough. If you're wrestling with God, stay wrestling with Him. And if you're not wrestling with God, maybe you need to step into the octagon and know that God will meet you there. Now, in the book of Genesis, where we find the story of Jacob, we're first introduced in the birth narrative that we looked at in part 1, and that's where he was named Jacob. And then right after that, there's this massive gap of years that just gets skipped, and all of a sudden we're told that the boys grew up. So we're not really sure all the childhood stories, but the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country. I mean, he's the classic man's man. I mean, hunter, warrior, protector, provider. That was Esau. And then we're told that Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Now, I know we're living in the day and age where we're all trying to avoid at some level some of the stereotypes when it comes to gender. And I don't want to offend anyone, so no, that's not my heart. But thousands of years ago, there were gender stereotypes were everywhere. So I started thinking about, how could I share about how vastly different Jacob and Esau were hopefully without offending anyone. And then I thought, Disney movies. You gotta love Disney movies. So I started thinking through Disney movies, like take Beauty and the Beast. It'd be like Esau was Gaston and Jacob was Chip, right? Like that's how different these two sons were. Or take Frozen. Jacob would be Olaf and Esau would be, Marshmallow. Yeah, I didn't know the abominable snowman that Elsa created was named Marshmallow, but you get the point. And my favorite Disney movie, The Lion King, it'd be like Esau is Mufasa and Jacob is Pumbaa. Do you get that picture? I mean, this is how different these two sons were. Now, there was a question I asked all of you in part 1. The question was, how messy is your family? And I gave a scale 1 to 10 and said, there's really no difference between very messy or extremely messy. We all have messy families. And then I said, but to Jacob's family, they get a 15. I mean, they set the bar for messy. And we're going to get a sneak peek into how messy their family truly is. You see, we're told Isaac, dad, had a taste for a wild game, and he loved Esau. And then immediately we're told Rebecca, mom, loved Jacob. Now, this wasn't some family secret. Everyone in the family, connected to the family, around the family knew that this was true. And maybe you were raised in a family where that brother, that sister was the favorite. Years and years ago, when Kiara, my oldest, was young, she started this little thing with me. She would ask me, Dad, who's your favorite? And at first, I kind of explained to her that I loved her and her sister equally. I loved them the same. But she kept on trying to get me to say that she was my favorite. And so I would say back to her, I'm like, well, Kira, you're my favorite oldest daughter. And she's like, no, Dad, I want to be your favorite. I'm like, no, you're my favorite oldest daughter. And then it kind of morphed over the years where then she was like, hey, Dad, am I your favorite? And I would say to her, hey, Kira, you're my favorite. And I'd pause a few seconds and she'd start to get a smile and I would include the word oldest. Now, sometimes I go an hour. And at some point, I'll just say to her, and I might scream it upstairs or downstairs, wherever she is, all she'll hear me say is the word oldest. And she goes, thanks, Dad. But what both my girls know is I love them equally. But for Jacob and Esau, there was a vast divide between, well, the love from their mom and their love from their dad to them. And so one day, Jacob was cooking some stew. Why? Because Jacob liked to cook. Remember, I know we live in a day and age where some of these gender stereotypes look different now. In fact, for me personally, I love to cook. I have a passion for cooking. There's nothing like, for me, it's therapeutic. I love cooking something and watching people enjoy it. A few weeks ago, I made chili for the entire staff, and I made the entire thing from scratch to the point where I had 3 different types of dried chilies. I roasted them. I made my own chili powder over the last few days because fall's in the air. I'm getting ready for the holiday season and soup season and chili season. And I made an entire batch of homemade chicken stock. And then I had some beef bones. I made some beef broth. I mean, now our freezer is filled with bone broth. Like I'm set and ready to go. I love cooking, but thousands of years ago, men didn't cook, but Jacob was doing the cooking, and Esau came in. Why? Because he's the man's man. He was a hunter. He was a provider. He was a protector. He came in from the open country, and where we are told that he was, famished. Now, it's easy to read that word and just think he was hungry. His stomach was growling. He missed lunch, or maybe he hadn't eaten in a day, and he came in and he was like, I'm just hungry. But that's not what this word means. In fact, this word means that he was weary, and it wasn't just like tired. He was completely mentally and physically exhausted. He was completely mentally and physically fatigued. I mean, he had nothing left to him. Yeah, it was attached to some hunger, but it was more than just being hungry. He had nothing left in it. He could have gone for days and days without food, and he had traveled a long distance. I mean, he came back in, and he had nothing left to give. And here's what I know. It's a question that I keep asking myself, and it's a question I'm sure you're asking yourself. Are you weary? Do you find yourself not being able to get enough sleep? I mean, you're trying to, and you wake up, and you're like, man, I'm still tired. I'm still exhausted. I'm still weary. Are you just mentally and physically and emotionally, spiritually wiped out? You see, the thing with weariness, and this is what we got to be so careful with. When you are weary, impulsive decisions rise. And when you're weary, now intensifies. So Esau comes in from the hunt, and he's completely famished. And he said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I mean, he's so hungry, he just sees something red in the pot. He doesn't have time to think about it. He doesn't pause to think about what type of stew it is. He sees a color. He goes, hey, give me some of that red stew. I'm famished. I need to eat now. And Jacob seizes the moment because, Jacob wanted something. And he seizes the moment and says, first, sell me your birthright. In part 1, we looked at these 2 components that were really a big deal several thousand years ago, the birthright and the blessing. And Jacob right now is going after the birthright. The birthright was usually given to the oldest son. It could be given to another son, and the birthright could be purchased. But those are rare instances. Why? Because the birthright was something very special. With the birthright came at least a double portion of the inheritance or more. With the birthright came when the father died. Well, the son, usually the oldest son, with the birthright would take charge of leading the entire family estate. I mean, it came with power, it came with some prestige and prominence, it came with a lot. And Jacob wanted the birthright. So he says to his brother, hey, first, got to give me your birthright. And well, Esau goes, look, I'm about to die. And what good is the birthright to me? Remember now? When you're weary, the impulse rises. When you're weary, now intensifies. And Esau is completely emotionally, physically, mentally void. And he's like, what's good is my birthright? I want the stew now. For all of us, we're in a season where our emotional, mental epicenter is just upside down. Do you feel it? I mean, all of your emotions are out of whack. They're kind of just off kilter. You're trying to process what you're feeling, what you're sensing. And well, I find myself going to my wife a lot, just going, I feel this, I'm processing this. I just don't even know what to do with it. Like, I've been finding myself more and more just recognizing the fact that what we have come through has thrown all of us off kilter. All of our emotions are upside down. Recently, I read this article, and there's a famous director. He actually produced the classic documentary. It was titled Civil War, and his name is Ken Burns, and he was on this podcast. And in the podcast, he was sharing about what everyone has gone through over the last 18 plus months. But then he said something that just, man, it stopped me in my tracks. He said, everything we have gone throughout this COVID season, he goes, has the same intensity, the same impact. And then he listed off these 3 world events. He goes, it's the same impact as the Civil War and the Great Depression and World War II. See, I have found myself trying to just dismiss what we've gone through, not to make light of it and not to ignore it, but just to say, oh yeah, it was a difficult season, but let's go. And then I would find my emotions upside down. I'd find this weariness that I just can't shake. And when he said, hey, don't miss this, that what we've all gone through, I mean, within our communities, within our nation, around the world, what we've gone through has the same impact, the same intensity as the Civil War, Great Depression, and World War II. It caught my attention, and I hope it catches your attention, because what's going on within you, we all are weary. We all are emotionally and mentally just exhausted. And it's not just some small thing that we'll wake up one day and it's over. And you see, for Esau, he was famished. And he's like, what good is my birthright anyway? And he comes to his brother, and Jacob goes, no, you got to swear to me first. You got to swear to me. So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Now, I think about this moment. So think with me. Esau, fierce warrior. Jacob, homebody. Esau, skilled hunter. Jacob liked to sit with the women around the tents. Esau would go out days, weeks at a time to come back to provide for the family. Jacob would cook. What stopped Esau, the man's man, what stopped Esau from just walking up to Jacob and taking the stew for himself? Think about that. Because I sat there thinking about that. It's like, what stopped him from just taking Stu? What stopped him from pulling out his sword and saying, no, now? I mean, this difference between Jacob and Esau, it would be like if the UFC all of a sudden said, we're having a special octagon fight between Martha Stewart and Conor McGregor. I mean, that's Jacob and Esau. And it would not matter how famished Conor McGregor is. It wouldn't matter how weak he was. I mean, it's Conor McGregor versus Martha Stewart. What would have stopped Esau from just coming up and taking what he wanted? You see, remember now, when you're weary, when you're famished, when emotionally, mentally, you are void, our impulse rises. When you're weary, now intensifies. Are you trading the future for now? Are you trading the future for an impulse decision now? Let's get a little bit more specific with this question. Are you trading your financial freedom for what you want now? Are you racking up credit card debt for what you want now? Do you keep subscribing to things for what you want now? Are you not even thinking about retirement? Are you not even thinking about an emergency fund? Are you not even thinking about what's to come, but you just want to buy it now? I mean, Christmas season is coming. Every year I'm blown away by the record credit card debt that people go into just for Christmas and the number of months it takes them on average to pay off those credit card debts. One of the things my wife and I said years and years and years ago is that we're not going to put Christmas on credit cards. We're going to have a budget, and if we have that money in cash, we're going to spend it. If not, we won't. And over the years, we've actually limited how many gifts we actually buy each other, and the meaning of Christmas has increased. Are you trading your financial freedom for what you want now? What about this question? Are you trading a Jesus-centered relationship for companionship now? Instead of waiting for God to bring someone who loves Jesus and lives like Jesus and leads like Jesus, instead of waiting and pushing into knowing that God will bring you someone, you're just trying to fill the loneliness void. You're trying to fill the companionship void. You're settling for someone. And where does that lead you? Or maybe this is the question you need to ask yourself. Are you trading a repaired and forgiven relationship for revenge now? You know you need to work on repairing a relationship. You know you need to extend forgiveness in a relationship, but you would rather seek revenge now. And maybe that revenge looks like just not talking to him. Maybe that revenge looks like passive aggressive statements. Maybe that revenge looks like, hey, you're just talking about that person to everyone else except for going to that person. Now, who knows what revenge looks like, but instead of focusing on how to repair and how to extend forgiveness to that person, well, the now is all about revenge. Or maybe this is the question you need to wrestle with. Are you trading a God-sized vision for safety and security now? God has a purpose for your life, and you know it and you sense it, but you want to live in your safety and security. And the now of your safety and the now of your security, you're ignoring what God wants to do in you and through you. Are you trading the future for now? See, what you got to remember is you follow you wherever you go. I mean, right now, I've had so many conversations with people. I mean, marriages are just imploding. They just are. And I'm trying to help people. I'm trying to talk with people. Say, hey, right now, emotionally, we're all upside down. So fight for your marriage. Fight for that relationship. Go all in. You see, there's something within all of us where we know the adage, the grass is greener on the other side, but that's true. It's greener on the other side until you get to the other side and you realize grass is grass, and oh, by the way, you follow you wherever you go. And so it's easy to start thinking about, yeah, this marriage, well, I can't fix, so I got to find someone else who will treat me, who will love me like I want them to love me, who will be the person I think they need to be. So you leave this one for someone else on the other side, but you fail to realize that you're following you to that other relationship. And guess what happens? That marriage is going to be hard and difficult, and you're going to have to work at it. Maybe it's a job. You go from one job to another job, one boss to another boss. And have you ever thought that if every one of your bosses are not competent, if every one of your bosses doesn't have integrity, if every one of your bosses is, that you are the constant? I mean, this happens in church all the time. People go from church to church to church. And I just want to tell them, guess what? If you leave one church to go to another church, you're going to leave that church as well. You're going to find a reason to leave. And what hurts is it fractures the church, the bride of Christ. Why? The church isn't about a structure, a building, a service. It's about relationships. And you're just fracturing relationships thinking that there's some perfect church somewhere. Instead of just sinking in and saying, hey, I'm committed to work with, to lead with, to be part of. Just recognize that emotionally, you're flipped upside down. I am right now. And that when you're weary, the impulse starts to rise. When you're weary, now intensifies. So maybe, just maybe, there's a list of decisions you should just slow down. Maybe, just maybe, there's a list of decisions that you just need to push pause on. Maybe, just maybe, you need to recognize that emotionally, maybe now is not the time for a life-altering decision. But for Esau, he wanted stew now. And he said, what's good is my birthright. So Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, then got up. I asked myself, do you think he even enjoyed the stew? Do you think he enjoyed sitting there eating it? And then he got up, and we're told that he despised his birthright. That he despised it. You see, there's something about the bowl of now. And the bowl of now is not just attached to Jacob and Esau. In fact, in Luke chapter 4, there's this moment where Jesus was preparing for his public ministry. And we're told that God, the Spirit, led him into the desert where he was tested. We're told that the devil, and whenever you hear the word devil, maybe you get this image in your mind of some red-faced, horned creature. And that's not what the word devil meant. The word devil means slanderer, defamer, accuser. And there was some person, some voice, that was trying to whisper in Jesus' ear. And 3 different times that's recorded, Jesus was offered a bowl of now. The first one that, this devil said to Jesus, like, hey, you're hungry because Jesus has gone 40 days without food. I mean, he is famished. He says, hey, why don't you turn these rocks into bread? What he was saying to Jesus, like, hey, use your power for yourself. And Jesus said, no, man must not live by bread alone. What Jesus was saying was like, hey, I'm going to trust God to provide. I'm not going to use my power to turn rocks into bread. I'm going to trust that God will provide for me. Then this slanderer, this defamer, this accuser, this devil, took Jesus up to a high point and said, hey, all of this can be yours if you just bow down and worship me. And what he was saying was, hey, Jesus, you don't have to go through the suffering part of your journey. You don't have to go through all the heartache. You don't have to go through dying. You don't have to go through any of this. Just worship me and it can all be yours. In fact, this slander, this accuser actually started to quote scripture to Jesus. And Jesus came back to him like, no. It's clear to worship God alone and serve him alone. And Jesus is saying, hey, what I must go through, I'm going to go through. And the third bowl of now is this devil, this accuser, this slander took Jesus to the top of the temple and said, hey, why don't you just throw yourself off and see if God's angels will save you, will catch you, will rescue you. What this devil, this accuser was saying was, hey, why don't you test God? Why don't you test God? See if he'll really show up. See if he really will do. And Jesus came back. And in fact, this devil had quoted 2 verses from Psalm chapter 91, but what this accuser, this devil, forgot was verses 9 and 10. And Jesus is like, no. I'm not going to test God. I'm going to trust God. See, ultimately, are you going to trust God? In the now, are you going to trust God to lead you? My encouragement for every one of you, including myself, is to resist the bowl of now for God's perfect future. And notice I didn't write resist the bowl of now for your preferred future. You see, maybe God is leading you through something that he wants you to go through. Maybe he wants you to go through a valley for you, but also maybe he wants you to go through the valley for someone else. You see, when you trust God, you say to God, hey, God, no matter what you bring my way, whether I like it or not, I'm going to trust you because, God, I know you want best for me, and I trust that your plan is perfect. My encouragement for every one of you, pay attention to the upside down emotional nature within you right now. Lean into God. Lean into him. Trust that he will guide you every step of the way. Let's pray. Lord, I just ask that we will resist the bowl of now, and that we'll trust you. That we'll recognize the fact that emotionally, mentally, we are all upside down. But God, know that you are doing something significant in us and through us. So may we lean into you, and may we trust you. In your name I pray. Amen.